I'm Ava Morgan, 29, graphic designer and apparently not real family. The wind clawed at my coat as I stepped onto the gravel path outside St. Augustine's chapel. The sky was low and heavy, the kind of gray that made everything feel smaller, like the world was pressing down on you. My boots crunched softly as I walked past parked cars lined up like stiff mourners, every window fogged over from grief or gossip. Inside, the warmth hit like a wall floral arrangements, too much perfume, and the soft sob of gospel organ. My fingers curled around the folded obituary in my hand. There was Grandma's face, smiling in black and white, eyes kind like always. But the pews were already packed. Everyone was turned inward, heads tilted, tissues crumpled. I moved toward the front, not because I wanted attention, but because that's where I always sat with her. She'd whisper jokes during hymns, call out the preacher in stage whispers when he misquoted scripture. I just wanted to feel close. But as I slid toward the family row, a hand touched my shoulder. "Excuse me." A woman's voice clipped behind me. I turned. It was Aunt Cheryl, high heels, tighter dressed than appropriate, that sour perfume I used to sneak sprays of as a kid. "This row's for family only," she said, low but pointed, eyes flicking to my coat like it was the problem. "I am family," I whispered back. She gave a short, bitter laugh. "You were never actually adopted. Ava, this is for blood relatives." Something in me cracked, quietly, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. People were watching now. Cousins I used to build blanket forts with. Uncles who stopped calling when I turned 16. I nodded, swallowing something thick in my throat, and stepped back down the aisle alone. I found a seat near the far wall, half obscured behind a column. I couldn't even see the casket. If you've ever been through something like this where you're grieving and excluded at the same time, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. The service began. Prayers. A song Grandma hated. Cheryl did a eulogy. I didn't hear most of it. I watched the dust float through the stained glass like ghosts and tried to breathe through the ache. I kept my head down until the final hymn ended, and people started filtering into the hall for refreshments and, God help us, inheritance talk. I wasn't going to stay for that. I had no appetite for fake hugs or careful whispers. I stood, smoothing down my coat. When a crisp voice cut through the chapel air, Ava Morgan heads turned. I froze. A man in a navy suit stood at the foot of the altar, thick file folder in hand. His silver-rimmed glasses glinted beneath the chandeliers. The lawyer, Grandma's lawyer. He looked straight at me. "Please don't leave just yet. Mrs. Margaret Morgan named you first in her personal will." Silence. Everyone turned. Aunt Cheryl's face froze mid-fake smile. My cousin dropped his coffee cup, and for the first time that day, maybe in years, I felt every single eye in the room finally see me. The silence stretched. You could feel it crawling up the walls. I didn't move at first. My feet were lead, glued to the spot like if I stayed still enough, this wouldn't be happening. But the lawyer just waited, calmly flipping open his folder, giving the crowd a moment to whisper and rearrange their expressions into curiosity or confusion. I stepped into the aisle. The walk to the front felt like slow motion. My hands were clammy, heart pounding in a strange rhythm that wasn't fear, more like shame trying to shapeshift into defiance. I could feel people watching, not out of malice, necessarily, but that odd discomfort people carry when the story shifts and they're not sure which version is true anymore. I didn't glance at Cheryl, didn't need to. I could hear her breath catch behind me, the shuffle of her heels repositioning, the muttered "what the hell" to no one in particular. The lawyer, Mr. Whitaker. I remembered now extended a hand politely, like we were in a conference room and not at my grandmother's funeral. He nodded toward the front pews. We'll begin shortly. Margaret left detailed instructions. I opened my mouth to speak, maybe to say I wasn't supposed to be here, or to ask what he meant, but no words came. I sat down instead, hands twisting the program in my lap. Grandma's face smiled up at me again. It didn't feel like comfort anymore. It felt like a dare. Within minutes, the crowd settled again. The front pew filled with Margaret's children, Cheryl, Uncle Kent, and the ever-distant Brian, who had only flown in from Atlanta this morning, judging by the airport tag still hanging from his suitcase. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years now lined the opposite pews, clutching coffee cups like lifelines. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat and began. As requested by the deceased, we'll be reading select portions of the will aloud, before distributing copies privately. This gathering was instructed by Margaret herself. She wanted no secrets. There was a murmur at that. No secrets. In this family. The room had that sharp, nervous energy now, the kind that comes when the dead speak through paper and nothing is off limits. I'll begin with her message to Ava Morgan, Mr. Whitaker said. Another ripple. Some heads turned again, even though they knew exactly who he meant now. My throat was dry. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. He unfolded a handwritten letter on cream stationery and began reading in that steady, lawyer tone. My dearest Ava, if you're hearing this, I'm gone and you're probably still unsure where you fit in this family. That's not your fault. You were 7 when you came into our lives, small and quiet, with eyes that saw everything. No one ever told you the full truth, and I regret that. I tried to bring it up with Cheryl once, and she told me not to confuse things. But let me be clear. Darling, you were my granddaughter the moment you walked into my home. Not by blood. Maybe. But by heart. You stayed. You listened. You helped me hang up my scarves when arthritis stole my fingers. You made me feel like a woman again. Not just a dying matriarch waiting for someone to collect my things. This family didn't make room for you because you weren't convenient. But I saw you. I loved you. And so I'm leaving you the house. All of it. The land, the garden, my rose-colored china, and even the old teacup you glued back together after Brian broke it at Christmas. It's all yours, because you were the one who never left. The final line hovered in the air like a ghost. You could have heard a pin drop. No one moved. Even the organ player froze in place behind his bench. Hands folded stiffly. Cheryl's lipstick-smudged mouth was parted just enough to show her teeth, and her fingers twitched on the hem of her dress like she might tear it. The house. Grandma's house. That creaky, vine-wrapped, 2-story miracle where she taught me how to sew a button and read poetry aloud in the kitchen. The one I hadn't been allowed to visit in months because Cheryl said it was inappropriate for someone not legally family. She can't do that. Cheryl snapped suddenly. She can't just give away. She can, Mr. Whitaker said calmly, not looking up. And she did. It's legally binding, and notarized 3 times. Shall I continue? Cheryl's mouth opened again, but Brian cut her off this time. Just let him finish, he said, surprisingly soft. We all knew she liked Ava. Liked. The word hit like a slap and a gift all at once. That's how they'd processed it. Then like I was a favorite pet. Not someone raised by her hand. Mr. Whitaker moved on, reading out other smaller bequests. Cheryl received a silver locket. Brian got a painting. Kent. A collection of first edition books. The cousins got checks and jewelry. It was all standard. Oddly fair, but I couldn't concentrate. The sentence kept echoing. You were the one who never left. It was true. Even when they iced me out. even when Grandma's health declined and no one else wanted to be there for the long, boring, unglamorous parts. I read her books. I sat through her silence. I brought her lavender oil when her joints swelled. I was there. But now that that truth had weight, had legal backing and a will to prove it, they were all looking at me like I was a stranger who'd snuck in and stolen something. After the final papers were read, Mr. Whitaker folded his folder closed and gave a small bow. That concludes the reading. Copies will be mailed, but anyone with questions may see me privately in the next room. The crowd didn't move at first. Then slowly, they began to rise. A few offered me stiff nods. A cousin patted my shoulder and didn't say anything. Cheryl stormed out without another word. Brian stayed seated. I turned to Mr. Whitaker. Did she really mean the entire house? He looked at me over his glasses, and his face softened for the first time all day. She insisted. Said it was the only thing she had left to make it right. My hands trembled. I stared down at them like they belonged to someone else. That house had held every version of me, child, teenager, the girl who cried after being told I didn't belong. Now it was mine. But it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a door had opened and now I had to walk through it. Alone. I didn't go to the reception afterward. While the others drifted toward the church basement to pick over plastic trays of cheese and cold cuts, I walked straight out the front door and into the wind. The gravel shifted beneath my boots again, but now it sounded different, less hesitant, more like movement. I didn't know where to go, so I drove, past the cemetery, past the diner where Grandma used to order lemon pie and black coffee. I didn't cry. Not yet. My eyes burned but stayed dry. Like my body hadn't caught up to the emotional math. I was too stunned to grieve properly. Or maybe I'd already done my grieving in private, when she started forgetting my name and mistaking me for her younger sister. My car took me to the place I hadn't been allowed in almost a year, her house. It sat at the end of a narrow road, cradled by oak trees that groaned in the wind. The same cracked sidewalk, the same paint-chipped mailbox leaning sideways. But now, I had the key. I parked out front and stepped out slowly. The house looked like it was holding its breath. A curtain fluttered in an upstairs window. My chest tightened. The last time I was here, Cheryl had yelled at me in the driveway, telling me to stop confusing Margaret and let the professionals handle it. I'd stood there crying while the nurse inside closed the door. Now I was alone again. But this time, I had the right to be here. I pushed the key into the lock, turned it, and the door creaked open. The smell hit me first lavender and dust, like time had slowed but not stopped. I stepped inside. The floorboards sighed beneath my feet the way they always had. A glass bowl still sat on the hallway table, full of wrapped butterscotch candies she used to bribe the mailman with. Everything was untouched, frozen. I walked slowly through the house like I was walking through a memory. The living room still had the Afghan draped over the couch. Her slippers were tucked neatly beneath the ottoman. A magazine sat on the armrest, open to an article about early dementia. I didn't sit. I just stood there and listened. The ticking clock in the hallway. The faint hum of the refrigerator. The absence of her voice. Upstairs. Her bedroom was sealed in time. The bed made. A glass of water half full on the nightstand. Her rosary beads coiled beside a folded handkerchief. I touched nothing. Then I saw the envelope. It was lying on the vanity, just below the mirror. My name on the front, in her handwriting. Sharp, upright letters. The kind of script no one teaches anymore. I picked it up with trembling hands and sat on the edge of her bed before opening it. Ava, if you made it back here, that means Whitaker did his job, and the others have probably lost their minds. I'm sorry I didn't say more while I was alive. I was afraid of what Cheryl would say. afraid you'd think I didn't do enough. But I saw you, sweetheart. I saw how hard you tried. You were never loud, but you were always present. That means more than noise. This house is yours now, and I hope it gives you peace. I know it's just wood and wallpaper to some, but to us it was refuge. One last thing. Check the blue box under my bed. That's yours too. No one else knows about it. Take your time. My hands were shaking when I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope. I slid off the bed and dropped to my knees, reaching beneath the frame. My fingers touched cardboard. The blue box was exactly where she said. I pulled it out carefully, dust clouding the air. It wasn't locked, just taped shut with a strip of brittle masking tape. Inside were pieces of a life no one else had cared to keep. Photos of me in pigtails, holding her hand in the garden. A pressed flower from the first bouquet I gave her at the nursing home. Letters I'd written as a kid. Dear Grandma, I love you more than peanut butter. And paperwork. My stomach turned as I sifted through it. An old custody agreement, my foster placement forms, medical records with her name listed as my emergency contact over and over again. A notarized affidavit from 2002 declaring intent to adopt. Pending final decision from parent or guardian, signed in her looping script. The adoption was never finalized. That's why they said I didn't belong. But Grandma had fought for me. Even if she lost the legal battle, she'd never lost the emotional one. I sat on the floor of her room for a long time, watching the dust dance in the light from the window, listening to the echoes of a house that once held laughter and lemon cake and whispered lullabies. Eventually, I packed the box carefully and brought it downstairs. I didn't know what to do next. There was no roadmap for this. No guidebook for how to inherit a home from the woman who raised you but was never allowed to call you daughter. So I did what I always did when I felt lost. I cleaned. I washed the mugs in the sink, dusted the hallway shelves, watered the plants that hadn't died. I found her apron still hanging behind the pantry door and looped it around my waist. I swept the floor with her old bristle broom. Every motion felt like a spell, like I was conjuring her back one sweep at a time. By sunset, the house looked alive again. I sat on the front steps, watching the sky turn orange, then bruised purple. A part of me expected someone to show up to tell me I had to leave, that it had all been a mistake, that I was still the girl sitting behind the pillar in the church, not the woman on the deed. But no one came. Instead, a cat wandered out from the neighbor's yard and curled itself beside me. I scratched behind its ears and finally let myself cry. Not loud, not messy, just a quiet kind of release, the way rain starts with a drizzle after too many days of heavy clouds. I stayed there until it was almost dark, until the air chilled and the first star blinked into view. Then I stood, turned the porch light on, and went inside. The next morning, the house didn't feel like mine. It felt like a museum curated by someone who used to breathe in this space, someone who folded linens in a specific way, kept jars of sugar cubes for tea, arranged knickknacks by color and not use. Every object had a fingerprint I couldn't clean off, even if I tried. And I wasn't sure I wanted to. I made coffee in her old percolator. It hissed and popped like it always did, refusing to die. The smell was strong, bitter, comforting. I drank it at the kitchen table, where the sunlight pooled onto the faded tablecloth like melted gold. Her chair across from me sat empty, angled just slightly outward like she might walk in at any moment. Then the doorbell rang. I jumped, sloshing coffee onto the rim of the mug. For a moment, I thought it might be Cheryl, that she'd come back to reclaim whatever dignity she thought she'd lost. But when I opened the door, it was Brian. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe just tired. His blazer was wrinkled, his tie gone, shirt collar open like he'd been wearing it too long. He had one hand in his pocket, the other holding a bakery box. "I brought scones," he said. I stared at him. "From Lila's. Grandma liked the blueberry ones." A pause. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly and watched him walk into the living room like it was still his. He looked around at the books, the photographs, the folded blanket on the couch, then set the box down gently on the coffee table. I figured, after yesterday, you might not want to see anyone. "I don't," I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fair." I stayed standing while he sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees like a student waiting for a lecture. I could tell he wasn't here to fight, but I didn't know if I wanted to listen either. "She talked about you a lot," he said. "More than the rest of us, to be honest." "She raised me," I replied, voice flatter than I meant it to be. "I know." His fingers drummed lightly on the lid of the box. "It's just back then. Things were messy. You came when I was starting college. Cheryl had just gotten divorced. Kent was still drinking. No one knew how to bring someone else into the middle of that." I crossed my arms. "So you left me out." He winced. "We didn't know how to include you." "That's not the same thing." He nodded slowly. "You're right. For a while, the only sound was the clock ticking above the mantel." Then he sighed and opened the box. 4 scones, neatly wrapped. He picked up one and placed it on a napkin like an offering. "I'm not here to contest anything," he said. "The will, the house, it's all yours." "She wanted that." I didn't respond. He hesitated, then added, "Cheryl's furious. She's talking to her lawyer. But Whitaker's solid, and I think even she knows she'd lose." I leaned against the wall. "Then why are you here?" He looked down at the scone in his hand. "Because I was a coward," he said. "I let my sister take the lead. I let my mom grow old without stepping in. And I let you grow up without saying anything to you that mattered." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "I don't need an apology, Brian." "I know. But I needed to say it." He stood then, dusting crumbs off his pants. "I also wanted to give you this." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. Inside was a key. "What's this?" I asked. "To the safety deposit box, the one Grandma kept. I only found out about it last week. She gave me my own key years ago, but I never used it. I figured, it's yours now." I took the pouch but didn't open it. "Thanks," I said, quietly. He nodded once, then stepped toward the door. Before he left, he turned back and looked at me. "Really looked. She was proud of you, Ava." She didn't say it like some people do, loud and performative, but she felt it deep. Said you were the only one who ever truly stayed. Then he left. I stood there long after the door closed, the key warm in my palm. The bank was cold and smelled like disinfectant. A young woman named Stephanie led me down a narrow hallway to a secure room, then stepped out so I could open the box alone. Inside were papers, jewelry, a faded black and white photo of a girl I didn't recognize, standing beside a younger Margaret, both smiling in front of an old tractor. There was also a letter. This one dated years earlier, maybe never meant to be read. "To whomever finds this, I have spent much of my life pretending to be acceptable. That meant silence when I should have fought, smiling when I wanted to run, and sometimes letting people I loved believe I was only kind, not fierce. But I have been fierce. I fought to keep a child who wasn't mine by law, but was mine in every way that mattered. I fought for her in doctors' offices, at school conferences, in rooms full of social workers who saw her as a placement, not a person. I failed some of those fights, but I never stopped showing up. If you are reading this, you are the legacy of that fight, And I hope you forgive the quiet ways I loved you. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. Outside the vault, Stephanie waited politely. I didn't cry. Not there. But I carried the letter like it was a spine I hadn't known I'd needed. That night, I slept in her bed. It felt strange at first, like wearing someone else's shoes. But I didn't change the sheets. I just climbed beneath the quilt and lay there, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster like old maps. The house creaked in the dark. Wind slipped through the window frames. Somewhere, a faucet dripped, faint but rhythmic. And still, I slept. For the first time in weeks. I slept deeply. Not because everything was okay, but because something inside me had shifted. Subtly, but completely. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was full of presence. I woke to birdsong. Not from my phone. Not some playlist or app trying to simulate peace. Real birds. The kind Grandma used to talk to as if they were neighbors. Whistling back at robins through the kitchen window. The kind of morning you only get when there's no traffic outside your door. No apartment hallway with footsteps or muffled arguments. Just the breath of old trees and the low hum of a house that remembered how to hold silence. I pulled her quilt tighter around my shoulders and sat up. The bed still smelled faintly of her rose water and something sweet beneath it, like sugar cookies or vanilla powder. My feet touched the floorboard where she used to keep her slippers. I didn't reach for them. Instead, I padded downstairs barefoot, drawn to the light filtering through the kitchen. I brewed coffee again, stronger this time, and leaned against the counter as it bubbled. I could still hear her in the back of my mind. Don't rush it. Darling, good coffee takes its time, just like good people. She'd say that when I was impatient as a kid, when I wanted answers right away, when I wanted love to be loud and obvious. I stared out the window, into the backyard. The garden was overgrown. The lavender bushes had doubled in size, their stalks bending under their own weight. The roses had gone wild, curling up the trellis like they were reaching for something, but the gate was still there, slightly crooked, and beyond it, the little stone bench where she used to sit with her tea and talk to the bees. I took my mug and went outside. The grass was wet with morning dew. My feet sank into the earth with each step. I made my way to the bench and sat carefully, cradling the mug like a warm secret. The world smelled like soil and memory. A squirrel darted across the fence. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime tinkled out a half-song in the breeze, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I talked to her, out loud. I don't know what to do. Grandma, I whispered. They still don't see me. Not really. The wind stirred the lavender. I want to be strong like you. But I'm tired. I'm tired of proving I belong. A crow called from a tree above, and I know you tried. I know you wanted more for me. But it still hurts. I looked down at my lap. My fingers were shaking. I took a deep breath. I'm here, I said. I stayed, like you asked. I didn't expect an answer, but I felt something, a stillness, or maybe a kind of acceptance that rose inside me and made room for everything else. The anger, the confusion, the ache, all of it. And then I saw them, tiny shoots, right at the base of the roses. New growth. Life where no one had planted it. As if the garden itself had decided to keep going, no matter who was watching. Later that day, I got a text from my cousin Leah. Hey, I know things were weird at the funeral. Do you want to meet for coffee sometime? Just us. I stared at the message for a while. Leah had been the only one who didn't join in when the others whispered about me behind Grandma's back. She'd never said much, but she hadn't shut me out either. I typed back, okay, I'd like that. She responded immediately with a heart emoji and a time. It wasn't everything, but it was something. We met at a quiet cafe near the edge of town, not the kind of place where anyone would be recognized or interrupted. Leah wore her hair in a loose braid like she used to in high school, and her sweater sleeves were stretched out at the cuffs like she'd been tugging on them all morning. She hugged me when I walked in. A real hug. No hesitation. We ordered coffee and sat by the window. "I'm sorry," she said as soon as we sat down. "For what?" "For not speaking up. For letting Cheryl say those things to you. For watching it all happen and pretending it wasn't my business." I looked at her, surprised by the rawness in her voice. "I didn't expect you to fix it," I said. "No, but I could have made space. You were the only one who actually knew Grandma by the end. We just visited on holidays. You lived it." I nodded slowly. "It didn't feel like enough." "It was," she said firmly. "She always said you were the one with the still hands. That you noticed things most people missed." That made my throat tighten. Leah reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. It was of the two of us, maybe 12 years old, covered in flour and laughing in Grandma's kitchen. "She kept this in her sewing drawer," Leah said. Said it reminded her that family isn't about what's printed on paper. I blinked hard. "She left me some of her earrings," Leah continued. "But honestly, I think what you got means more. You have the roots." That word stayed with me long after she said it. Roots. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. I cleaned more. I started sorting her books, making piles for donation and for keeping. I called the utilities companies to update the accounts. I made lists of repairs that needed doing: gutters, windows, a leaky faucet in the laundry room. The house was becoming something else, not just a place I had lived in, but one I was responsible for now. It needed tending. It needed choices. I even started sketching. Designs for the back garden. Ideas for a tiny studio in the sunroom. I hadn't drawn for myself in years, not since college took the joy out of it with deadlines and critique panels. But now, the paper felt like a companion, a space where I could rebuild, reshape. One afternoon, I found a box in the attic filled with Grandma's old sewing patterns. Hundreds of them, some traced by hand, some yellowed with age, all marked with little notes in her handwriting: "Add length here. Ava's favorite color, try blue. Too tight in the shoulders, loosen." She had been tailoring more than clothes. She had been building comfort. And I realized maybe that's what I could do too. Maybe this house wasn't a monument. Maybe it was fabric, waiting to be sewn again, differently this time. A few weeks later, the letters started arriving. Not from family, at least. Not most of them, but from people I didn't know. Handwritten envelopes, neatly addressed to Ava Morgan, often with shaky cursive or smudged return addresses. One had a stamp from Michigan, another from a retirement community 3 towns over. The first one I opened was from a woman named Diane Marston. The letter was 2 pages long, written on floral stationery with blue ink that bled slightly around the curves. "I was one of the home nurses who visited your grandmother in her final months. She often spoke about you while I checked her vitals, said you were quiet like her sister Ruth used to be. But she also said you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. I just wanted you to know she always asked about your drawings, said you used to sketch her when she fell asleep in the garden. She kept a notebook of your work in her bedside drawer. I only looked once. I hope you don't mind. I hadn't known she kept those. I thought I'd thrown most of them away, doodles of her sleeping, the curl of her hand, her hair tied back with a scarf. But apparently, she had saved them, tucked them away like secrets." The next letter was from the church janitor, Ms. Morgan. "I know we didn't speak, but I saw you that day in the back row. You look like someone who had something to say and nowhere to say it. Your grandmother always said the quietest ones carry the most. I figured I'd tell you that, in case no one else did. I set the letter down on the kitchen table and stared at the steam rising from my tea. People had seen me. Not many, but enough. In the months that followed, I stayed. I had every opportunity to leave, sell the house, take the money, move back to the city where my resume would make more sense. I'd had interviews, freelance offers, even a recruiter who promised me triple what I was making before, whatever that had been worth. But the thought of abandoning this place after everything felt wrong, not just because of sentiment, but because I hadn't finished building what she left behind. The house needed repairs. I hired a contractor named Luis, who reminded me of my high school art teacher, calm, direct, and surprisingly poetic when talking about wood grain. He replaced the roof shingles, fixed the front steps, and promised to come back in spring to rebuild the back porch. "I knew your grandmother," he said one day while measuring a beam. "She used to bring lemonade out in a mason jar when I fixed her fence 5 years ago. Said her granddaughter would inherit the house one day. That you were the only one who'd fight for it." I stared at him. She said that he nodded, told me not to worry about the others, said, "My Ava knows what roots mean. She'll plant something new here." That word again, roots. It kept circling back, like the universe was trying to draw a straight line through all this silence. I started making changes. Nothing drastic, just layers. I kept the bookshelves, the old piano, the floral curtains that still smelled like pressed lavender. But I turned the dining room into a studio, hauled in my drawing table, a shelf for watercolors and ink, a corkboard full of clipped magazine pieces and color swatches. I began designing again, not for clients, not for deadlines, but for meaning. I sketched layouts for community spaces, park benches shaped like folded letters, murals for buildings no one noticed, a bus stop that doubled as a poetry wall. I didn't know what would come of it. I just knew I wanted to fill this town with something that made people feel seen. One afternoon, I got a call from Leah. "Do you remember the old bookstore on Mason Street?" "Yeah," I said. "The one that closed down after the fire. They're rebuilding it. The owners want to turn it into a community gallery. Small, local stuff. Art, photography, memory walls." I told them about you. I didn't respond right away. "They want to meet," she added. "See your work. Maybe give you a wall. A wall, not a pedestal, not a plaque. Just a wall to hold something I'd made." For a moment, I forgot how to speak. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." The gallery opened in late March. It was small, with high ceilings and creaky floors that still smelled faintly of smoke. But the light was good natural, golden at dusk. My wall was near the back, beside the poetry corner and an old grandfather clock that no longer worked but still stood like it had something to say. I hung 7 pieces, all sketched in the sunroom, all based on moments no one else had seen. Grandma brushing her hair in the mirror, her eyes soft with distance. The corner of her garden where the lavender grew wild. My child-sized hands holding her thread spool as she mended a hem. A staircase lit by afternoon shadows. The blue box beneath her bed. A pair of teacups. One chipped, one full. And the front porch at twilight. Empty, but waiting. People came. Locals. Mostly. Some I didn't know. Some who pretended not to recognize me from the funeral. But they looked. Really looked. And when they spoke, they didn't ask about inheritance or bloodlines. They asked about memory, about feeling. One man stood in front of the lavender sketch for 10 minutes. When I approached, he said softly, "My mother used to grow these. Same curve in the stalks. Same color, too." He didn't ask who I was. He just saw what I had drawn. That night, I walked home through quiet streets. Spring was finally breaking through winter's hold. The air was soft. The wind no longer sliced, just brushed gently against my skin like a reminder that time had shifted. I reached the house just as the porch light blinked on. The same porch where I had once stood feeling like an intruder. Now it felt like mine, not in the way that's about ownership or paperwork, but in the way something becomes part of your breath. Inside. The clock ticked. The windows glowed. I made tea and sat by the window, sketchbook in my lap. Not because I had to draw, but because I could. Spring bled into early summer, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel like rejection, like standing just outside the door while someone laughed inside without you. Now it felt like room to breathe, room to grow, room to remember without being consumed by remembering. I spent my mornings in the garden, pulling weeds with my bare hands, nails rimmed in soil, sweat dripping down the curve of my back. I wasn't good at it. Not yet. I overwatered the peonies. I misread a seed packet and planted sunflowers where the tomatoes should have gone. But still, things grew. It wasn't just plants. Letters kept arriving, one every week or so. Some from people Grandma had worked with at the old library before it closed. Others from women she'd known at church. From a man she'd met during a volunteer trip decades ago who still remembered her laugh. And with each envelope, a piece of her came back. One woman sent me a photocopy of a recipe for lemon lavender shortbread, with a note. She made this for us every Christmas, said it was Ava's favorite, but I'm stealing it for the choir. Another included a snapshot of a book club roster, my name written in the margin with a heart around it. She said you always read ahead. The woman had scribbled in the corner, called you her little professor. I pinned them to the wall above my drawing desk. Not just the letters, photos, notes, scraps, anything that echoed her voice. I was building something I didn't have the words for yet. A shrine, maybe, or a map. Or a reminder that silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes Cheryl still tried to call. I never picked up. Once, she left a voicemail flat and clipped, as if reading from a script someone else had written. I think we need to discuss the tax situation, she said. We may have rights regarding the land, depending on how Margaret filed the deeds. Call me. I didn't. Brian called a few times. 2. His messages were gentler. Hey, just checking in. Hope the garden's going okay. I passed by last week. Didn't want to interrupt. Let me know if you need help with the lilacs. Grandma always said I had a talent for trimming the ones that grew wild. I still hadn't called him back. It wasn't anger anymore. Not even bitterness. It was space. The kind of space I'd never been allowed before. I wasn't ready to shrink it just to be polite. One evening, Leah stopped by with a bottle of wine and a stack of photos. I was cleaning out Mom's attic, she said, and I found these. I think they belong with you. We sat on the porch, sipping wine from chipped mugs. The photos were faded, some curling at the corners, others scribbled with notes in the margins. Margaret at a county fair, younger than I'd ever seen her, holding a lemon in each hand like trophies, a blurry shot of her in her garden, squinting at the camera, one of me, asleep on her lap, her head tilted down toward mine. I pressed that one to my chest without thinking. I miss her, Leah said quietly, more than I expected. Me too. She wasn't perfect, she added, but she never pretended to be. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fireflies rise from the grass like tiny, flickering truths. Leah nudged her mug against mine. To Margaret, who saw more than we gave her credit for. To Margaret, I whispered. I started saying yes to more things. A neighbor asked if I could design a flyer for the annual summer picnic. A local teacher saw my sketches in the gallery and invited me to speak to her art class. The town newsletter asked if I'd write something about Margaret, just a few words. Nothing formal. I said yes to all of it, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because the fear that used to curl around my voice like smoke was thinning. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I didn't need to justify why I'd stayed or why I'd been chosen. I was just here, and that was enough. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store to find a brown paper package on the front step. No return address. Inside was a worn scrapbook. At first, I thought it was something I'd forgotten I had, but the handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't Grandma's either. It was my mother's. Or at least, the woman who had given birth to me. The front page held a photo of me as a baby, bundled in a yellow blanket, cheeks round and eyes wide. The caption below it simply read, "Ava, 2 months old, loves light, hates naps." There were only a few pages. A lock of hair, a birthday card from when I turned 1, a note I hope she finds someone better than me. The last page was blank. No name, no explanation. Just silence. I sat on the floor of the hallway, package beside me, unsure whether to cry or scream or do nothing at all. It didn't answer anything, but it changed something. Not because I felt connected to her, but because I finally understood how much Margaret had chosen me. Not out of obligation, but out of love that had no paperwork, no guarantees, and no promise of reciprocation. She chose me in the absence of everyone else. She stayed. I didn't tell anyone about the scrapbook. I placed it in the blue box under my bed, beside the letters and the custody forms and the photos. Not to forget it, but to keep it in the place where I kept things I wasn't ready to let define me. And I went back to work. The garden bloomed in uneven bursts. I painted the kitchen cabinets a soft green. I learned how to reupholster a chair using videos that buffered too often but taught me enough. The house began to change shape, not in structure, but in spirit. It carried me now, and I carried it. One night, I sat on the porch and opened my sketchbook. I didn't draw the house or the garden or Margaret. I drew myself, not from memory, from now, barefoot, sitting in the grass, eyes half closed, arms resting on knees, not smiling, not performing, just existing. For once, I didn't erase anything, the first time I called it home out loud. I was on the phone with the hardware store. They were confirming a delivery paint, screws, new curtain rods, and the clerk asked, "Is that for delivery or pickup delivery?" "Please," I said, "to my home on East Woodbine." It slipped out naturally. No hesitation, no awkward pause, like I was pretending to own something that didn't belong to me. Home. Not hers. Mine. After I hung up, I just stood in the middle of the living room holding the cordless phone, letting the word echo through the space. Home. 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 The walls didn't respond, of course, but they didn't need to. I already knew the truth. Summer thickened into its heaviest version, humid and relentless, the kind of air that sticks to your skin. I moved slowly through it, ceiling fans always on, curtains pulled halfway to let in light, but block the worst of the heat. I drank iced tea out of mason jars, left my sketchbook open on the kitchen table, and let the radio hum quietly in the background, playing old jazz standards Margaret used to hum while folding laundry. It was during one of those slow, sweating afternoons that I heard the knock. Not the sharp, impatient kind. This one was careful, measured. I opened the door to find Cheryl on the porch. She looked tired, not in the way makeup can fix, but in the bone-deep way that comes from a life lived defensively. Her blouse was neatly pressed, but her eyes were rimmed red, and she clutched her purse like it was keeping her upright. "I won't come in," she said. "I just need a few minutes." I stepped aside anyway. Wordlessly. She walked in slowly, scanning the room like she was bracing for something missing or misplaced. "It looks cleaner than I remember." I didn't answer. She turned back to face me. I was wrong. The word sat between us, heavy and unfamiliar. "You were just a kid," she continued, "and I didn't know what to do with you. You weren't mine. You weren't ours." I raised my eyebrows, but I was hers. "Yes." Her voice cracked. "Yes, you were." She walked over to the fireplace and stared at the framed photo of Margaret that I'd placed there just last week, her in her favorite green scarf, smiling at something just outside the frame. "She loved you more than all of us," Cheryl said. I flinched, but she shook her head. "That's not jealousy. That's truth. I spent most of my life making her feel like a burden. You made her feel like a person." A long silence. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I just thought you should know I see it now. Too late. Maybe. But I do." I didn't know what to say. I'd imagined 1,000 versions of this moment, some where I yelled, some where I shut the door in her face. But I hadn't imagined this one. This strange, soft truth-telling. This small, dented offering. "You can stay for tea," I said finally. She blinked. Surprised. "Only if it's no trouble." "It's not." We sat in the kitchen, 2 mugs between us. I poured the tea slowly, added sugar to mine. She drank hers plain. "Did she ever tell you about the cabin?" she asked. "No." She wanted to buy one. Up north. Somewhere near Lake Erie. Just a little place to escape. She used to send me listings. I ignored them. I didn't say anything. "She would have taken you," she added. "Probably would have painted the walls pink if you asked her to." That made me smile, in spite of everything. Cheryl looked down at her mug. "Brian's thinking of moving back. Said he might want to help fix up the church." "That'd be good," I said. She nodded slowly. "And if you ever need anything, even just an extra pair of hands, I'm trying to show up now, in the only way I know how." It wasn't redemption, but it was human. Later that week, I found Margaret's recipe box buried in the back of a kitchen cabinet, wooden, worn at the edges, filled with index cards in her handwriting. Some were oil-smudged, others folded, one with a child's scribble across the back, mine. Likely. I laid them out on the counter, marveling at the little notes she'd scrawled in the margins. "Add cinnamon if Ava's coming. Use butter, not margarine." She always knew the difference. "Don't burn these again. Ava will laugh." Each card was a memory disguised as a recipe. I chose one at random, lemon poppy seed bread, and started baking. The smell filled the house like her laughter. Bright, sharp, warm. When the timer rang, I pulled the loaf out and let it cool on the windowsill, the way she always did. I sat at the table and ate the first slice alone. The second, I saved for someone else. The gallery invited me to do a solo exhibit in the fall. "Your drawings brought people in," the coordinator told me. "They stayed for the art, but they came back for the story." I didn't know what to say to that. It had never been about a story to me, just memory, just survival, just trying to make sense of the echoes. But maybe that was the story. I said yes. Over the next few weeks, I worked late into the nights, sketching with the windows open, moths tapping gently against the screens. I painted Margaret's scarf, her garden gloves, the crack in the hallway wall that she never got around to fixing. I painted the kitchen in morning light. I painted the empty chair across from mine. I painted myself, again and again, until the reflection stopped feeling like an apology. By late August, the town had accepted me in the way small towns eventually do quietly, without fanfare. People nodded at the grocery store. A neighbor left a basket of zucchini on my porch. The librarian asked if I'd help design new signage. One day, an older man I didn't recognize stopped me on the street. "You're Margaret's girl, aren't you?" I nodded. "She was a good one," he said. "Would have liked what you've done with the place." I thanked him, and I believed it. I still talk to her sometimes, not in a spooky, theatrical way, just softly. When I'm folding laundry or kneading bread or sitting on the porch watching the stars come out, I say her name. I tell her what I'm growing. I read her old poems aloud to the rose bushes. Maybe no one hears it. Or maybe she does. It doesn't matter. The house listens either way. The night before the gallery opening, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of cicadas and the ticking of the hallway clock. The same one that had lulled me to sleep as a child when Margaret would read aloud from her creaky armchair, her voice soft and steady. Tonight, that voice felt close again, not in memory but in rhythm, her pace in the quiet, her breath still woven into the walls. I got up just after midnight and padded down the stairs barefoot. The house was dim, but not dark. The moonlight slanted in through the front windows, silvering the floorboards. I passed through the hallway, past her photo, and opened the door to the sunroom, the place that had become my studio. All 7 new pieces stood against the far wall, framed and wrapped. They'd be delivered in the morning. For a moment, I sat cross-legged on the rug, letting my hand brush over the frame corners, as if grounding myself in something real, something finished. This wasn't just an exhibit. It was a goodbye. Or maybe not goodbye, maybe just a release. A recognition that grief and growth often live in the same breath. The opening was small, exactly how I wanted it. No speeches, no staged performances, just people wandering, looking, letting the art speak. The gallery walls were washed in soft amber light, the kind that made everything feel like a photograph half remembered. My section was tucked in the back corner again, but this time, it didn't feel hidden. It felt held. The new series was titled Things That Stay. Each piece was quiet, domestic, intimate. A close-up of Margaret's hands, stitching a hem, a view from the porch steps, leaves mid-fall, a teacup with a hairline crack, glinting in the sun, the kitchen window at dawn, the old blue box, half open, a girl's shadow on the garden path, and the last, just the word stay, stitched in thread across a piece of linen, framed like art because it was. People stopped and stared longer than I expected. One woman cried. Another asked if I was selling prints. Leah came, wearing a pair of Margaret's earrings. She hugged me before she even spoke. "She'd be so proud," she whispered. "I hope you know that." Brian came too, standing quietly in the back, his hands in his pockets. When I walked over, he just nodded. "She would have loved this." I nodded back. "I'm glad you came," I said. He hesitated. "I brought something. For afterward. If you want." We didn't say more. But later, after the crowd thinned, he handed me a small envelope. Inside was a note in Margaret's handwriting. "Ava, if you're reading this, then something beautiful has already happened. Don't let the world shrink you. You were always meant to take up space. It wasn't signed. She didn't have to." The days after the exhibit blurred into a soft stretch of calm. The garden bloomed wildly. I let it. The sunflowers towered over the gate, their yellow heads bobbing like witnesses. The lavender needed trimming, but I left it for the bees. The porch creaked under the weight of a rocking chair I'd finally restored. I sat in it every evening, sketching or reading or simply watching the dusk settle in like a second skin. I didn't need the house to prove anything anymore. It wasn't a claim or a possession. It was a living thing. A memory stitched into the present. A breath that had learned to carry me. I was still receiving letters. But now, some were for me. Former students who'd seen my work at the gallery. Locals who wanted help designing murals for their businesses. A teacher from my old high school who apologized for how silent they'd been when I was the girl with no real family. Even Cheryl sent one. Just a card. Handwritten. Thank you for the tea. I've started baking again. I tried the lemon poppy seed. Not as good as hers, but I remembered the smell. That was enough. I pinned it beside the others. Not because I'd forgotten, but because forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. It just asks for space. One evening, near the end of summer, I pulled the blue box out from under my bed one last time. I laid its contents out in front of me. Letters, photos, forms, the lock of hair, the note from the woman who gave birth to me. And then, I added something new, a photo of me from the gallery, standing in front of things that stay, holding a sketchbook against my chest like a shield. I wrote one line on the back. She chose me, and I stayed. Then I closed the box, gently, and slid it back under the bed. Not to bury it, just to let it rest. I still walk the town in the early mornings, still nod at neighbors, still stop at the coffee shop where they know my order now. Still pause outside the library, imagining what it might have looked like when Margaret worked there. Still notice the cracks in sidewalks, the chipped paint on storefronts, the way people carry their lives in little rituals, paper cups, phone calls, open windows. And sometimes, I sketch them, not for an exhibit, not for praise, just to remember that I'm here, that I belong, that I made it. A few weeks ago, I found a small child's bracelet under the rose bushes, pink beads, a plastic charm shaped like a heart, probably dropped by a neighbor's kid or a visitor during one of the summer walks. I held it in my hand for a while, then placed it on the porch railing with a note. Found treasure yours. It was gone the next morning. I smiled, knowing it had returned to someone's wrist, someone's small story. It reminded me that we all leave pieces behind on porches, in journals, inside rooms where we were once invisible. Sometimes they're found, sometimes they're kept. Sometimes they bloom again in places we thought were finished. I don't know what happens next. I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't know if I'll stay in this house forever, or if one day I'll pack it up, carry its scent with me in boxes, and build something new. But I know this. I am not an accident. I am not a placeholder. I am not the girl who didn't belong. I am Ava Morgan, and I stayed.